The Celestara Nexus shimmered in the endless blackness of space, its immense structure spinning slowly above the cratered surface of Liara's moon. From a distance, the station resembled a vast, metallic flower, its intricate rings rotating in opposing directions, casting fleeting shadows over the moon's jagged surface. The station wasn't just an engineering marvel, it was a symbol of hope, a beacon for interstellar diplomacy in an increasingly fractured galaxy. Within the station's Grand Convergence Hall, a cavernous space designed to host representatives of every imaginable species, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Delegates from dozens of civilizations filled the circular room, their forms as varied as the planets they hailed from. Towering insectoids stood beside shimmering gelatinous beings, while humanoid species mingled with entities that seemed to defy biology itself. All eyes, however, were on the human standing at the center of the room. Captain Cale Arden stood stiffly at parade rest, the dark blue of his military uniform pristine and unyielding. The silver insignia on his chest gleamed under the soft light of holographic displays that floated above the chamber. Despite his outward calm, Cale's stomach churned with unease. He had faced combat, negotiated peace with hostile alien factions, and even diffused interstellar crises, but nothing had prepared him for the task ahead. "Let me get this straight, Captain Arden," said Commander Derek Solis, standing beside him. Solis's grizzled face, lined with age and stress, betrayed none of the doubt gnawing at him. "You're volunteering for the Valrek bonding ritual? The same ritual that killed 3 previous candidates?" "Yes, sir," Cale replied, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. "Someone has to try." "And you think that someone should be you?" Solis pressed, his piercing eyes locking onto Cale's. "Why?" "With respect, sir, my record speaks for itself," Kyle said. He spoke with the confidence of someone who had rehearsed this conversation in his mind 100 times. "I've successfully handled 12 first contact missions, including the Orion crisis. I've spent years studying alien psychology. If there's a chance to build a bridge with the Valrek, I can do it." Solis frowned, his expression darkening. "That's not the whole reason, is it?" Cale hesitated. He could have lied, but there was no point. "I'm expendable, sir. No family, no attachments. If I fail, the cost is mine alone." "Expendable isn't what we need, Captain," Solis said sharply. "We need successful. Do you even understand what you're up against? The Valrek aren't just another species. They're 9-foot-tall telepathic warriors with traditions so old and so rigid that they make our diplomacy look like a child's game. They've barely tolerated our existence in this sector, and now we're asking them to form an alliance? To trust us? That's why the bonding ritual is critical," Cale replied, stepping closer to the holographic display at the center of the hall. The image of a towering Valrek warrior rotated slowly above the platform. Their silver-scaled skin glimmered faintly, and their glowing purple eyes seemed to pierce through the room, even as a projection. "The galaxy is shifting, sir. If we don't form alliances now, we'll be left behind. And if the Valrek decide we're a threat, we won't just be isolated, we'll be annihilated." Before Solis could reply, a commotion near the station's primary docking bay drew the attention of every being in the hall. The massive doors at the far end of the chamber hissed open, revealing the arrival of the Valrek delegation. Leading the group was Zira Thal, their chosen diplomat and warrior emissary. Her entrance was enough to silence the room. At 9 feet tall, Zira had to duck slightly to pass through the 3-meter doorway, but the movement didn't diminish her imposing presence. Her silver-scaled skin shimmered under the station's artificial lighting, casting faint reflections of blue and violet with every step she took. Her glowing purple eyes swept across the room, her gaze sharp and calculating. She wore ceremonial armor engraved with intricate patterns, each symbol denoting her rank within the Valrek warrior caste. Her presence was regal, commanding, and utterly terrifying. Gael swallowed hard. He had studied everything there was to know about the Valrek, but nothing could have prepared him for Zira. Her sheer size, the aura of strength she exuded, the way the room seemed to shrink in her presence, it was overwhelming. "Last chance to reconsider, Arden," Solis murmured, leaning close to him. "No, sir," Cale replied, his gaze locked on Zira. "I'm in." Zira tilted her head again, her glowing purple eyes narrowing in thought. "Honesty. Unexpected. I will remember this." She stepped back, her massive frame retreating with an elegance that belied her size. "Proceed, Captain," Let us see how prepared you truly are. Kale exhaled silently, his chest tight with the pressure of the exchange. He turned and walked back to his place beside Commander Solis, who was watching him with a mixture of skepticism and grudging respect. "Well," Solis muttered under his breath, "you didn't embarrass us. That's something." Kale didn't respond, his attention still on Zara. She had returned to her delegation, but he could feel her gaze lingering on him even as others stepped forward to address her. The bonding trial was scheduled to take place the following day in the station's Unity Chamber, a secure and isolated section of the Celestara Nexus. The chamber was specifically designed to host rituals, negotiations, and ceremonies of significant cultural importance, its modular environment adaptable to the needs of dozens of species. Kale spent the night in his quarters, restless and unable to sleep. His mind raced with thoughts of the trial. The Valrek bonding ritual was shrouded in mystery. It was said to forge a mental and emotional connection between participants, but the process was fraught with danger. The previous human candidates had died during the ritual, their minds overwhelmed by the sheer intensity of the Valrek's telepathic presence. Despite his training and preparation, Kale couldn't shake the nagging fear that he might meet the same fate. The next morning, Kale arrived early at the Unity Chamber. The room was vast and circular, its walls lined with glowing runes that pulsed faintly, as though alive. The air was heavy, carrying a faint metallic tang that prickled at the back of his throat. At the center of the chamber was a raised platform surrounded by concentric circles, each etched with alien symbols that seemed to shift and shimmer under the light. Zira was already there, standing near the platform with an almost statuesque stillness. Her silver-scaled skin caught the light, giving her an ethereal, almost otherworldly glow. She turned her head as Kyle entered, her gaze sharp and unreadable. "You are early," she observed, her voice resonating softly in the chamber. Kale shrugged, stepping closer. "Couldn't sleep." Zira studied him for a moment before nodding. "Good. A restless mind is a focused one." As they moved to the center of the platform, Zira began to explain the ritual. "The bonding ritual is not merely a test of endurance, Kyle Arden. It is a merging of minds, hearts, and souls. You will see me as I truly am, and I will see you. There will be no barriers, no secrets. If your mind is not strong enough to endure, it will shatter." Kale swallowed hard but nodded. "I understand." Zara's lips twitched, a hint of amusement breaking through her stern demeanor. "No, you do not, but you will." She extended a hand, her massive fingers spreading as if inviting him to step closer. Kale hesitated only for a moment before placing his smaller hand in hers. Her skin was warm and faintly textured, like polished metal under his touch. "Your mind to my mind," she intoned, her deep voice reverberating through the chamber. "Your heart to my heart, your strength to my strength." Kale repeated the words, his voice steady but soft. "Your mind to my mind, your heart to my heart, your strength to my strength." As the final words left his lips, a surge of energy crackled through the air, and the glowing runes on the platform flared brightly. Kale felt an intense pressure in his skull, like the weight of an entire ocean pressing down on him. His vision blurred, and for a moment, he thought he might collapse. "Do not resist," Zara's voice echoed in his mind, no longer confined to the physical world. "Open yourself to the connection." Kale gritted his teeth, forcing himself to relax. Slowly, the pressure began to ease, replaced by a flood of sensations. Memories, emotions, and thoughts that were not his own poured into his mind. He saw flashes of Zara's life or childhood on the Valrek homeworld, the rigorous training she had undergone as a warrior, the immense weight of responsibility she carried as a representative of her people. In return, Kale felt his own memories being drawn to the surface, laid bare for Zira to see. His years of military service, the loneliness of a life spent in uniform, the deep longing to prove that humanity could be more than conquerors and colonists. Air thoughts began to intertwine, their minds merging in a way that defied explanation. It was as if they had become one being, sharing not just their experiences but their very essence. "You are different," Zara's voice whispered in his mind, tinged with a faint note of wonder. "Your thoughts are chaotic, yet there is purpose, resilience. And you're not as unshakable as you seem," Kale replied, his mental voice steady despite the overwhelming sensations. You carry more doubt than you let on. Zira's presence faltered for a moment, a flicker of vulnerability slipping through the connection. Do not presume to understand me, human. I'm not presuming, Kale said. I'm just seeing. The connection deepened, and Kale felt a sudden rush of emotion that took his breath away. It was raw and unfiltered fear, anger, hope, and something else, something deeper. It took him a moment to realize that it wasn't his emotion, it was hers. Enough, Zira said abruptly, breaking the connection. The energy in the room dissipated, and Kale staggered back, his chest heaving as he struggled to catch his breath. Zira stood still, her towering form as composed as ever. But there was a flicker of something in her glowing purple eye, something that hadn't been there before. You are still alive, she said, her voice carrying a note of surprise. Impressive. Thanks, Kale muttered, running a hand through his hair. I think. Before they could say more, alarms blared throughout the station, and the chamber was bathed in flashing red light. A synthesized voice echoed through the comm system. Emergency alert. Security breach detected in Sector Theta -9. All personnel evacuate immediately. Kale's military instincts kicked in. He turned to Zira, who was already moving toward the chamber's exit, her movements swift and purposeful despite her size. Theta -9, Kale said, falling into step beside her. That's near the station's power core. Then that is where we must go, Zira said, her voice calm but firm. If the power core is compromised, this entire station will be destroyed. Kale nodded, drawing his sidearm. Lead the way. The alarms blared louder as Kyle and Zira sprinted through the station's winding corridors, the pulsing red lights casting eerie shadows on the metallic walls. Zira's towering frame moved with a grace that belied her size, her footsteps heavy but calculated. Kale kept pace beside her, his smaller stature allowing him to maneuver more easily around corners and through narrower passages. The attackers have breached Theta -9, Kale said, his voice clipped as he keyed his communicator. Security teams, what's your status? The comm crackled with static before a panicked voice responded. We're pinned down. Hostiles are heavily armed plasma cutters, concussive charges. They're targeting the power core. Zira glanced down at Kyle, her glowing purple eyes narrowing. If the power core is destabilized, the resulting explosion will obliterate this station and everything within 10 kilometers. I know, Kale replied grimly. That's why we're not letting that happen. As they approached a sealed bulkhead, Kale activated a nearby control panel. The system flashed red, displaying a lockout warning. Damn it, they've overridden the security systems. Zira stepped forward, her massive hands gripping the edges of the bulkhead. With a low growl, she pulled, her immense strength bending the metal frame until it tore apart with a screech. Kale stared in awe as she tossed the twisted panel aside as though it weighed nothing. I will clear the path, Zira said, stepping through the opening. Stay close, human. Kale smirked, gripping his sidearm tighter. Lead the way, giant. They emerged into a service corridor near the power core, where the attackers were already entrenched behind makeshift barricades. The scent of scorched metal and the faint hum of destabilizing energy filled the air. A group of 5 figures in armored environmental suits worked frantically to place explosives along the core's protective shielding, while others provided cover fire with plasma rifles. Zira didn't hesitate. She surged forward with startling speed, her massive frame a blur of motion. The attackers barely had time to react as she barreled into their defenses, her enormous strength sending one of them flying into a wall with a sickening thud. Kale followed close behind, using the chaos to his advantage. He dropped to one knee and fired a precise shot, the plasma bolt hitting one of the attackers square in the chest. The armored figure crumpled to the ground, their weapon clattering uselessly beside them. Focus on the explosives, Kale shouted, dodging a hail of plasma fire. I see them, Zira replied, her voice calm despite the chaos. She grabbed a piece of discarded debris and hurled it at the attackers near the core. The makeshift projectile slammed into their barricade, scattering their formation. Kale darted forward, skidding to a stop beside the explosives. His fingers worked quickly to disable the first charge, sweat dripping down his temple as the timer counted down. 10, 9, 8. Kale, Zira's voice thundered in his mind. He turned just in time to see one of the attackers lunging at him from behind, their plasma blade raised high. Zira moved faster than he thought possible, her massive hand reaching out to grab the attacker by the arm. With a quick twist, she disarmed them and sent them sprawling to the ground. Kale exhaled sharply, his heart pounding. "Remind me to thank you later," he muttered, returning to the explosives. "Do not die before you have the chance," Zira replied dryly. Kale grinned, despite himself, as he disabled the final charge. Done. That's one problem solved. Before they could regroup, a sudden wave of pressure crashed into Kale's mind, leaving him gasping. His vision blurred, and he staggered backward, clutching his head. "Kale!" Zara's voice cut through the haze, but even she seemed momentarily affected. She growled low in her throat, her body tensing as the telepathic attack intensified. The source of the assault became clear as a new figure stepped into view. Unlike the other attackers, this one wore sleek, black armor etched with glowing blue patterns. Their helmet bore the sigil of the Valrek Dissident, faction those who opposed the bonding ritual and the alliance with humanity. "You should not have come here, emissary," the figure said, their voice amplified by a vocal modulator. "You and your pet human will not leave this station alive." Zira's eyes flared with anger, her hand curling into a fist. "You disgrace our people with your cowardice. Stand down, or I will make you regret your betrayal." The dissident merely laughed. "You think yourself strong, Zarathal. Let us test that strength." They raised a hand, and the telepathic pressure surged again, this time directly targeting Zara. Her knees buckled slightly, and for the first time, Kale saw her falter. "Zira!" he shouted, forcing himself to his feet despite the mental assault. He staggered toward her, his mind reaching out instinctively through the bond they had begun to form. "Let me in," he thought, the words echoing across their connection. Zira's glowing eyes snapped to him, her expression a mixture of surprise and determination. "Foolish human," she muttered, but her mind opened to his. The connection snapped into place like a puzzle piece, their thoughts merging once more. Kyle felt her immense strength bolstering his own resolve, while his focus and adaptability flowed into her. Together, they pushed back against the telepathic assault, their combined willpower overpowering the dissident's attack. The figure staggered, their grip on the mental assault faltering. Zara didn't waste the opportunity. She surged forward, her massive frame colliding with the dissident like a battering ram. The force of the impact sent them crashing into a wall, their armor cracking under the pressure. As the last of the attackers were subdued, Kale and Zara turned their attention to the power core. The Valrek dissident's sabotage had destabilized its energy matrix, and the core was now emitting an ominous hum. "We have to stabilize it," Kyle said, scanning the control panel. "But I don't recognize half of these systems." Zira stepped forward, her glowing eyes narrowing as she studied the panel. "I can guide you, but it will require complete synchronization." Kale hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "Do it." Zira placed her hands on either side of his head, her touch surprisingly gentle. "Your mind to my mind," she murmured, her voice resonating through his very being. "Your heart to my heart," Kale replied, his voice steady despite the overwhelming sensations. The bond flared to life, stronger and more vivid than before. Kale felt Zira's memories and knowledge pouring into him, her understanding of Valrek technology, her experiences as a warrior, her deep, unspoken fears. In return, he gave her his focus, his resolve, and the unyielding belief that they could succeed together. Their minds worked in perfect harmony, their combined knowledge allowing them to stabilize the core just as its energy output reached critical levels. The hum subsided, replaced by a calm, steady rhythm. "It is done," Zara said, stepping back. Her expression was unreadable, but there was a softness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Kale exhaled shakily, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Not bad for a small human, huh?" Zira's lips curved into a rare smile. "You are sufficient." Back in the Grand Convergence Hall, the aftermath of the breach was felt throughout the station. Reports of the dissident faction's involvement spread quickly, but so did the news of Kyle and Zira's success. As they stood before the gathered diplomats, Zira placed a massive hand on Kyle's shoulder. "This human," she said, her voice resonating through the hall, "is proof that strength does not come from size or power alone. It comes from unity, from trust." Kale glanced up at her, surprised but grateful. And from really big friends, he added with a smirk, earning a soft laugh from Zara. The hall erupted into applause, marking the beginning of a new chapter for both humanity and the Valrek. As Kyle and Zara left the hall together, their bond stronger than ever, they knew this was only the start of their journey. Together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead not just as allies, but as something far more profound. The Nexus Accord had been forged, and the galaxy would never be the same.